Important elections that are on the horizon. A date hasn't been announced, but voter registration process, you have another opportunity, the 8th and the 9th, and the urge is for you to please go. Don't wait until the last minute. Make sure that you use that opportunity to vote. Advocate Tlakula, let's chat a little bit about some of the challenges that you've faced. As the IEC, you have to be beyond reproach. There can't be any doubt about the sense of fair play, and you're managing the process. So how do you approach questions that the integrity of the IEC is being brought to question now? The city press, for example, reported that they found Tlokwe vote fixing, vote rigging taking place there, and that you're colluding with the ANC.
I would have been pleasantly surprised if you didn't ask that question. So I came here prepared for it. You know, some of the allegations that we read about in the city press came to us for the first time. As you know, there is currently a case before the Electoral Court on the Tlokwe election. So it will not be proper for us to go deeply into the issues that City Press has raised. But of concern to us really is the fact that there are issues that we read about for the first time. And what we intend to do is to engage the City Press quite deeply to just make us understand, you know, what the issues are. But to say to South Africans, we are an independent, impartial election management body. Anyone who makes allegations that we are in collusion with any political party has to produce evidence to that effect. But having said that, you know, the media is an important institution in our country and promotes you know, information. It gives information to the population, and we respect the media. But I think it is important for us to engage with City Press on the issues.
What about the behavior of political parties? Because we're talking about people being canvassed, T-shirts being promised, and people being told that they can go and vote in other words. Is it possible that it could have happened?
I don't know. I'm not going to say to you it has happened or that it hasn't happened. But also to say that we are an election management body, and that political parties and their supporters have certain responsibilities. When there are allegations of passing of voters, that voters are passed to a ward where there's an election to enable them to vote where they're not supposed to vote. Firstly, that is an offense. Voters must know that if they vote incorrectly and knowingly, that constitutes an offense. But political parties have to take responsibility to ensure that they don't, you know, engage in this activity of passing, which is becoming a problem in our country.
All right, let me ask you another way. Are your processes sufficient enough to be able to pick up this kind of thing? Because if they're not, then it might be happening.
We have to look at the law, Peter. The law in South Africa says that South Africans register where they live. It is not a requirement in law for South Africans to produce an address or proof of residence in a form of a bill, you know, from the municipality. It is not a requirement. Our processes are such that when a voter comes, we have a map for the voting district and for the ward where the election is going to be held. We ask the voter, they fill in a form, what's your address, where do we live? We look at the map. If, you know, we, after interrogating the voter, we come to the conclusion that the voter does not reside within that ward, we tell him or her that you cannot register, you don't belong here. But if a voter comes into that ward or voting district and gives us an address that is within that ward, we will accept it because we have no way of saying to us, you don't live at
So that's
that
a weakness
address.
though, isn't it?
It is a weakness, but it is a weakness not of our own making. You have to understand that. So that is why we depend on political parties to ensure that they assist us.
But you're the
to
judge,
men-
though, aren't you? The political parties will find any way to win. So you have to be the judge to make sure that they win fairly.
Sure, but we don't engage in those kind of things, and we don't have full proof. If a person gives us a false address, what can we do? Unless a political party comes and says Peter does not live where he says he lives, there is absolutely nothing that we can do. And my colleagues can also assist with this question, because it's something that we have been engaged in for almost the whole of last year and this year, because all our court cases, the court cases that were decided against us by the Electoral Court, were as a result of allegations of people registering where they're not supposed to.
Vice Chairperson Tlakula, do you want to address that? Because it is quite a concern, because a lot of people live in rural areas, informal settlements, and that becomes difficult to manage.
Absolutely. I think we've got to say that everything starts from the beginning. The chairperson has already indicated that we start with the legislation. Now, in terms of the legislation, you've got to register where you are resident. And a place of residence is defined in the legislation as a place where you return to after a period of temporary absence. So what it means is that any person who comes to the voting station or registration station to register, we've got to accept the bona fides of that particular person and register that particular person, as long as that person gives an address that is within the boundaries of a voting district that the chairperson has talked about. The only requirement from our side is that a person has got to bring a South African ID. The Constitution says you've got to be 18 years and above, you've got to be a South African. So for us to be able to check that, you've got to be able to produce that document that will be able to indicate that. But now this is the problem. If we were to say to the political parties that are sitting in parliament, the legislatures, that they must change the regulation in order to be able to accommodate that provision of saying a person must produce a proof of residence. How are we going to be doing that with people who are living in informal settlement? How are we going to be dealing with that with people who are living in villages who do not have addresses?
How do they do it when they get pay-as-you-go mobile phone? You've got to RECA. They have to produce proof of residence.
No, I don't know how that particular system operates, but I'm trying to suggest to you the kind of the difficulty that we're going to have. Essentially what that would mean is that we're going to be basically deregistering almost 80% of people who are currently on our voters' roll. And I don't think it is advisable for us to do that. We've got to stick with the spirit of the Constitution, and the spirit of the Constitution is saying every person who is South African who is 18 years and above must have an opportunity to be able to participate in the elections.
All right.
But I also, in conclusion, want to say, this issue, therefore, of people being passed, it is not really an issue of the IEC. It does not reside within the IEC. It's an issue that resides with the political parties and candidates contesting the elections. So it is important that these candidates and the political parties make sure that they do not do things that are outside the law. So if there is any person who's got to take responsibility for passing people, it can't be on the doorstep of the IEC. Okay. It's got to be with the political parties and the candidates contesting the election.
Okay. Thank you, Vice Chairperson. Okay, it's not at the doorstep of the IEC, but what is at the doorstep of the IEC, Advocate, is when you disqualify certain people for taking part in elections and the Electoral Court says you were wrong. How did you get it wrong? And can we be assured that you won't get it wrong again?
I can't give you that assurance, because things go wrong in an election. You know, there's no perfect election, and we rely in the electoral process on a large number of people that work in the voting stations. We train them to the best of our ability, and we equip them with the skills to be able to interpret the law. But in doing that, others get it wrong, either advertently or inadvertently. And I think we have to say to South Africans, there is nothing wrong in our processes being challenged in a court of law. We are a growing democracy. I said political parties now understand the electoral process. They do not take to the streets when they don't agree with our process. They go to the electoral court. We win some, they lose some, and that's in the name of democracy.
But I guess the question really at the end of the day is, we've noted a weakness of addresses. We've noted that perhaps some of your staff may get it wrong. Can you assure us then we can get a free and fair election that's credible?
Of course you're going to get a free and fair election. I mean, Peter, you know what the problem is? People take 10 isolated cases out of, you have 22,000 voting stations. Things go wrong in 3 voting stations, and then we then want to say that signifies a problem. We are here and we have nothing to defend. We apply the law. We will ensure that we train our staff properly, but we cannot sit here and say things will not go wrong. Things will go wrong because that is in the nature of an election. The question is, when things go wrong, what is it that we do to ensure that we correct the things that go wrong? And we always do that.
Okay, all right. Let's go to table 15, Williams L. Lisabe. Table 15.
Thank you, Peter. Madam Advocate, my question is that, is there a plan in place by the IEC to address issues affecting communities with service delivery protests in regards to voting? Thank you.
All right, so it's sort of part of what we've been looking at, but we're seeing these service delivery protests happening more and more. May they spill into the election process?
Of course, we get concerned when service delivery protests hamper our activities. As the IEC, we can do something. For instance, in the last registration, or during the last registration, we had problems in a number of areas, including Malamulele, Bekesdal. On our part, for instance, we will be going to Malamulele to have what we call a peace meeting, to try and talk to all the role players, including political parties and religious organizations, to try and see whether we can, make the situation more conducive to a free and fair elections. But we are not the only body that is responsible for this. It is important for government to step in, because issues of service delivery are not our issues. It's just that the voters will use the elections to highlight their issues. So we are in constant communication with the government to ensure that they deal with those issues, so that at the time when we go in for registration and for voting, there is some sort of environment that has been created that will enable us to do our work.
Table number 10, an interesting question from Strike Tlokwe. Table number 10.
Thank you very much, and greetings to the Chairperson of IEC, Pansy. First, to say to the young person that not all political parties make empty promises. Azapo doesn't.
Hang on. Order. No campaigning on this platform today.